Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Good to have you along. So today it's just the next installment really of the key concepts for beginners videos that I've been doing. I'm going to try and keep it as short and sweet here. These are meant to just be little bite-sized kind of things, just for people who are new to Kendo to be able to just prioritize, I guess, where the focus is, not to get bogged down too much in the wrong sort of details at the wrong sort of time. That's really the idea of the series. Anyway, so today's topic is Yuko Datotsu. Okay, so these are the criteria that you need to make a valid strike. Okay, and they incorporate several things. And some of it's in varying priority, and some of them are in sort of various dependencies, if that makes sense. But this is where Kendo kind of differs from the way other martial arts are kind of conducted in a competitive scenario. So when you're doing Shiai, this is the reason why Kendo is seen by high level Kenshi. So like when you're talking about like people who are like Hachidans, Nanadan, Hachidan, you'll often hear them disagree on whether the point of whether Kendo is a sport or not. They'll often say that they don't view it as a sport, and this is why. Because a sport has very clear rules and regulations. It's usually, they try to define something as it's black or white, rather than it being a gray area, or like a variable sort of degree to evaluate whether something is a valid strike or not. So Yuko Datotsu deals with how to evaluate a valid strike. But there's some kind of flexibility in this concept, and it requires interpretation, active interpretation from the judge or shinpan to evaluate that and make their decision. And the shinpan's view can differ from the other shinpan. Okay, so that's why it's judged by tribunal. So that's why you have three judges, and if two of them outvote the other, then the point stands. So if two of the judges put their flags up, say you cut a men, two of the judges think it was men, and they put the flags up, the other judge just has to accept that that's their view. There's a majority vote, and you get the point. But if just one judge puts their flag up, and the other two judges disagree with that and wave the point away, that one judge needs to accept that the two other judges have overruled them. They can, of course, have a conference and talk it over. If it's quite a very, like a very technical, contentious thing, they can have gogi, which is to summon basically they separate you and they come together and they have a little chat about it, and they can change the decision after consultation. But essentially what it breaks down to is how they're evaluating your strike, and whether it's successful or not depends on a few factors. So most people know about ki, ken, tai, no ichi, so striking with your sword, your spirit, and your body together. Okay, that figures in as part of Yuko Datotsu. Okay, it's part of that. So some of the requirements for Yuko Datotsu manifest themselves in having good Kiken Tai no Ichi. Okay, but the Kiken Tai no Ichi refers to things that are just directly under your control. So as a beginner, Kiken Tai no Ichi is something that will be pushed and pushed and pushed at you, because it's something that you can learn in the early days of Kendo and you'll make rapid progress on. Okay, people will be focusing very much on your physical ability to complete the techniques with good posture, with good timing, with good snap to the cut, and a good degree of accuracy. Say, for example, in where you hit on the target, is the angle of the blade correct? Things like this. Okay, so that's Kiken Tai no Ichi, is that timing of being able to bring it together with good posture, good timing, a sufficient snap to the cut, on target. Okay, and you'll be training that all the way up to Shodan, Nidan, Sandan until it's relatively polished. Okay, from Yondan onwards, there's a little bit less focus on that, because it's harder to find improvement from that point, because your foundation is already quite good, it's quite solid. So to find an improvement in those aspects, you're going to really have to focus on the small details. And so that's why they don't worry. For fourth dan and above, you start to worry more about how you generate opportunities. Okay, And that's the other side, really, of the Yuko Datotsu kind of coin. So we'll break that into two separate categories. So Yuko Datotsu, what does it entail? First thing you got to just obviously strike. When you strike, we'll talk about the stuff that's relevant to Kiken Tai no Ichi. You need to strike the correct target zone. So let's say it's men. Okay, they're obviously expecting you to strike the men area, which is here, not like the guy on the back of the head, not wrapping around like the side of the head like this, or skating down the side, that sort of thing. It needs to be on the correct target zone. You need to strike with the correct area of the shinai, so the monuichi, the last third of the blade in the middle of that. So between the little leather guy, that's like a third of the way from the top of the shinai. Between that and the last leather bit, in the middle of that is the monuichi. Okay, so the between the tip and that leather knotted part, that's called a nakayui. The angle of the blade needs to be aligned correctly. So if you're striking men, it needs to be straight. If you're striking saimen, it needs to be angled at about 45 degrees. If you're striking someone on the kote, if they're in chudan and their hands are down, the strike should be quite straight. But if you're catching them when they've lifted their hands, so like say they're in the middle of their man strike and that's where you catch them, it's a bit higher. If you cut them straight, the shinai will slide off. It won't make the right sound. So these are kind of the things that can hold you up physically. The other thing is like they won't, if the cut, maybe the cut has got good power, it's got good alignment, but your posture is really wobbly. So one of the things that your posture really breaking when you cut can give away is like a hesitation. In Kendo, accidental strikes aren't admissible. It has to be on purpose. And when your posture, so like let's say if your cut looks almost like you're falling, where your legs are like really far behind your body and you're kind of falling onto the target, there'll be shinpan who disallow that or don't view it as a valid strike because it looks like you're hesitating, you weren't sure, and you're sort of just trying to react in the moment. And so your body isn't really with your sword because it wasn't really an intention in the cut. These things are subjective, okay? So it's up to the shinpan to weigh that up as to why they think your posture is so broken. They're not expecting 100% perfection because in reality, no one is perfect, okay? Everybody's kind of like at various different stages of not so good, getting better still, reasonably good, very good, but everyone still has improvements to make right up to the top, right? Right up to like, people who are like hanshi, right? They would still tell you that there's still things they wish were better about their kendo, okay? So when you do these like super slow-mos and you go, hey, that guy's not in like proper kamae when he did the strike, play it back at full speed, okay? Kendo is judged at full speed, it's not judged in super slow-mo. It's to the naked eye that the judgment is made, okay? So super slow-mos are fantastic for going back and reviewing and going, oh, actually what happened here from a scientific point of view is this, I could do this better, so I'll try that next time, right? But judging Kendo is an art in itself as part of Kendo, as part of your learning experience. That's why we don't use replays and things like that. That's why it's not a sport, it's an art. Okay, so we talked about striking the correct zone on the armor, striking it with the correct angle of the blade, to correct edge alignment. It also needs to have a snap, enough power, but from good quality technique. So it doesn't, if you bludgeon someone on the head, it's not going to be a valid point. You could argue, yeah, with a sword that would cut. Arguably, yeah, you might be right, but it's not good kendo, so it's not going to get rewarded. So the power from the cut needs to come from correct use of your wrists and your fingers, the snap, the tenuchi, the grip on the sword, okay? And you need the good posture. To have the good posture, you need to obviously have good posture, but you also need to have good footwork, and the footwork has got to be in time with the cut. So that's the Kikentai kind of portion of Yuko Datotsu. So just on a separate point, there is a thing known as Gyamyo no Waza. So if you don't know what that term means, Waza is technique, yeah, your attack, the type of attack. So let's say if it's like Men, Kaishido, yeah, so you block and return, or if they cut men and you get their kote first, that's Debana kote. So it's a type of an attack. So Gemyo no Waza, the way it figures in the context of Yuko Datotsu is if you do something like an attack that is particularly difficult to pull off, or a technique that's particularly difficult to pull off, the judges, the shinpan, will, I hesitate to use the word show leniency, but they will acknowledge the difficulty of the technique or the situation. So let's say, for example, Menkai Shido is a good one to examine when you compare it to Nukido. Okay, so Menkai Shido is the one where, you know, they come to cut men, you catch it with the sword, and you return the cut to the door. Whereas a men Nukido is a situation where they go to cut men, and straight away you cut door. So there's no block in that. Out of those two techniques, the one that's seen as more difficult is the Nukido. Okay, because there is no time to block it. Basically, you have to be so switched on, so on top of the timing and the opportunity to slip through that small gap and not receive the men strike and still make the door strike. So the strike, for instance, the reason why I mention it is maybe you hit the door and the overall technique was very difficult to pull off, but maybe if, you know, the cut was just a little deep, or maybe the angle of the blade was just a little off or something like that, it'll sometimes be overlooked because the opportunity and the technique itself was such a good example in terms of the timing and the difficulty to execute, that it will account for the fact that maybe the cut wasn't like 100% perfect, or maybe the posture wasn't like 100% perfect. So that's why sometimes when you watch like a Ippon compilation or something like that, and you see someone pull off an attack like that, and you go, well, hang on, his posture wasn't like so great. It almost looked like he was like falling into the opponent, or maybe he did some sort of like funny like zanshin or celebration at the end where he was sort of like cut door, and the hand, you know, you get told like, don't let your hand go up here, and they're like rah! For ages, right? But in the heat of the moment, you know, it's just pulled off this really mega fantastically difficult attack or technique, so they can forgive a little bit of this kind of showiness, as long as it's like not like rude to the other player. It's the kind of thing that the judge, on the balance of judging the entire Ippon, it's the kind of thing that they can let go, because what happened, the important stuff that happened there, the really important stuff in terms of the actual technique, the opportunity, the timing, and the cut, overall that whole package was very impressive because of its difficulty. But then when you flip over to the rest of the criteria, you start to get into the opportunity side of this, okay? And it's a big portion, okay? So having a good cut is important, it's very important, but it's not the be-all and end-all of scoring an Ippon, okay? You can have a reasonable cut. Most high-level sensei, when you ask them, they would say a cut that's about 70%, 75% quality or higher is something that instinctually they want to think about awarding if the rest of the situation is very good and favorable to that person who's performed the attack, the technique. So how do they get the rest of the criteria to push that over the line and award it? It comes from the opportunity and the way it's built. Okay, so when you're fencing and you're engaging and there's a bit of pressure and there's a bit of pressure. Okay, if this person starts and they sort of put pressure, yeah, and then they step in and they go to cut, and this person is behind them and cuts, you know, sort of reacts to it, and the cut is 75%, they're probably not going to score it, because they're going to go, it's not a great cut, and they didn't really, that wasn't their point. They didn't start the interaction. They didn't create an opening. They just got a bit lucky because the other person was slower than them. So yeah, they shouldn't have touched the guy on the head, but because it wasn't a great strike, there's not a lot of incentive to award it as Ippon, because it just looks like a bit of a sloppy strike, and they didn't make the opportunity. Okay, but if the same thing's happening again in the fencing, and this time it's this person who's kind of really pushing for the point, and they both appear to set off at the same time, but this person gets that 75% cut and the other person doesn't really land anything, then this person's going to score that Ippon because they made the pressure, they made the opportunity, they made the opening. The cut wasn't perfect, but the whole situation when viewed together in terms of how the opportunity was made, where the opening came from, and the fact that that person did a reasonable cut to finish it, that all adds up, and that then is enough to award the Yuko Datotsu. So out of the whole 100% of how you award a point, you might say that 40 to 50% of that maybe is from the cut itself, and then for the other 50% you need to make it up of other criteria, which is how the opportunity was made. Did they have the sense, so did they have the initiative? Whether the person to start the pressuring to generate the opportunity. And that doesn't always just mean going forward. Sometimes it means like drawing them out, like you might go forward and then kind of pull them back and make them think like you're retreating, but actually you're just kind of setting them up to want to strike, and then you counterattack with like a kaishido or something like that. That's a bit more advanced though. It's not really relevant for beginners. For beginners, mostly think about like debana, timing, pressure, and then the moment that you think they're going to move, try to beat them to that men or kote. You'll get more Ippon that way, in my experience. So the opportunity counts for a big chunk. So let's say that's like another 25% that you can use to supplement how you judge that point if the strike is not 100% perfect. And even if it is a great strike, there should still be that element of opportunity there somewhere to be able to award it, okay? Unless the opponent is just gone to sleep, in which case that's fine. There's already an opportunity on the table. If one person's just kind of not paying attention and the other person just goes pop and does a really great strike and finishes up really well, that's fine, awarded. The last thing that I want to talk about, I'm not going to go through every single detail point. This is like 7 points, but I think we've covered them all anyway. But broadly speaking, I'm just trying to broadly kind of give you an idea of how judges weigh up a point. The last thing then is zanshin. So zanshin is the awareness. We tend to think of it always as after the strike, but it's also in the midst of things that are going on. Okay, so for example, let's say you do a cut and you just sort of, you make the pressure, and the moment you strike, you kind of stop concentrating on cut, and then you just kind of like walk away because you saw the flags go up. They can take that point back. Yeah, so if you just turn around, you walk away, they can refuse to issue the point. So you might get a flag go up, you might even get 2 flags that go up, and then you'll get them all change their mind and bring your flags down and wave the point away. and then you'll be kicking yourself because you're walking away with your back turned to your opponent, and if they're switched on, they'll have seen the instructions because they understand what the flags mean. They'll go after you and they'll get an Ippon when you turn around, and you won't know what happened. And it has happened. There's footage, you can find it on YouTube. And you will see it at Shiai from time to time. This does happen. So always stay switched on. Make sure that you get the... and as I said, stay switched on all the time. But even after the strike has been completed, so if you cut the man and you bang, go through, get eye contact, turn around, and get back into your chudon posture. Just make sure there's a reasonable distance before you turn, like enough so that you're not turning straight into each other. Like a shinai length or 2 is enough. And strong footwork to get you through, but don't zoom off into the distance with your back towards them. I made that mistake when I was like Shodan, and I spent this one Shiai just doing main cut after main cut, and they weren't really getting awarded. And I did a lot of hard work because I kept doing this footwork off into the distance. It just wasn't necessary. So yeah, make sure you get eye contact back on them and turn around as soon as you're at enough distance where you can turn around comfortably to re-engage at like Toma or Isoku Itanomai. If you're too far away for Toma, to be like, say there, if you're too far away, then you've probably gone too far. So zanshin is that last major component, okay? And it's one of the things, it doesn't always get called into question because most people have some degree of zanshin evident in their kendo, even if they've got maybe some bad habits with form after they cut. They might do, they might be a little overzealous with their celebration or something like that. it's seldom enough for people to strip the point off you. They'll maybe just have a word with you after the shiai about it. So mainly focus on, when you're a beginner, Kikentai is the be-all and end-all of your Kendo practice. When you're getting a hang of that, and that's usually around about the time that you've passed Nidan, that way people are like, okay, this is starting to look like reasonably good looking Kendo, okay? Because you can move fluidly and you're well balanced, usually around the time you pass Nidan. Then they'll start to be kind of starting to introduce more concepts around opportunity building, so that you're not getting these strikes accidentally. You're not just getting them because you're faster than the other person or more talented. You're going to get them on merit, and you're going to need that, because by the time then that you pass third dan and you start looking to progress towards fourth dan, fifth dan, then it becomes much harder. People don't make as many mistakes at that level. So when you're fencing somebody else who's the same level as you or higher, their posture seldom breaks. They're much more patient. They're much more confident in their own Kendo. So you're going to have to work much harder to create an opening to even be able to strike. But then when you do strike, you strike more reliably because you've got the experience and the practice under your belt. So there we go. That's Yuko Datotsu. Let me know what you think in the comments, if you've got any questions or anything like that. And I'll be back with another video in hopefully a fortnight or so. Right, until then, cheerio, bye-bye.